Hey, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm so glad that you're joining me today. I am Amber Boyd, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm coming back with a little bit of like bariatric information. So just a little quick intro yet again. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I've been doing this for several years, and I'm also a bariatric patient, almost 19 months post-op. And so just wanted to share some experiences both from a mental health and also from a bariatric perspective, and showing the intersections of that. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the biopsychosocial aspect of mental health, of bariatric surgery, and wanting to make sure that there's discussion about it, because I think sometimes there's this assumption that once you get the surgery that the physical is the only thing that changes, but there's so much that changes with this surgery because you're changing your entire life essentially, right? You're changing the way that you eat. You're changing the way that you engage in social settings because your portions change. What you can eat and when you can eat changes. Like having to decide if you're going to eat or drink because you need time in between. There's a lot to consider when you go into this surgery. Not saying that it's not worth it, because it absolutely is. I think having a surgery like this, when you struggle with weight or struggling to lose it on your own, this is an additional option for you to be able to lose it in a way that you're getting medical support to do so. So it's not the easy way out. I want to provide that disclaimer ahead of time. This is not what this conversation is about. I think taking a risk in having surgery at any point is something that can be technically dangerous, but I think it can also be life-saving. So some of the things physically that bariatric support or bariatric surgery can support with, I know that there have been a lot of people with diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, PCOS, some fertility issues, and some of those are linked to one another. And so being able to have a surgery like this, it can help with that. And I can speak to that from experience because I was diabetic before I started my journey. I was only a month when they diagnosed me, and when I went to go have the surgery, they took me off my medication immediately. So I haven't been on diabetes medication since then. I'm still in a space of needing to get my blood pressure checked and make sure that we're still low. But as far as diabetes, my A1C is even beyond or below, the pre-diabetic stage. So recognizing that this surgery has so many physical things that supports with changes, but it's not just the physical that changes with this. So when I say biopsychosocial, I'm thinking biology, so your physical health, your emotional well-being, so psychological, talking about your emotional well-being, and talking about your social environmental things that also change with this surgery. So some things to consider. I want to make sure that we talk about the changes that come with this surgery can also be positive and can be some challenges. I don't want to say negatives because I think there are things that can be worked through, but I definitely want to acknowledge that there are some challenges with this surgery and having other people involved in your decision. One of the things that isn't always accounted for is how you've experienced your body emotionally, mentally, socially, and it's important to really take that into account, because once your body goes through all of these changes, you lose weight relatively quickly, or maybe you're a slower loser as far as your weight is concerned, and how rapidly that changes, because the body, the mind sometimes will see the body as it used to be. And what they consider that is body dysmorphia, or if you have experienced trauma, how your body has been perceived or received, or even, dare I say, abused. It's really hard to go through a surgery like this that changes your body relatively rapidly, considering, and those changes sometimes don't catch up with your emotional and mental state because you're losing weight faster than you're processing it through, and you're having to change your entire diet, right? You go from maybe eating 3 big meals a day to maybe you have a liquid diet. There are different phases that you go through. There's like taking out straws. There are taking out different like snack foods, finding alternatives and dupes. Sometimes that takes a lot of mental work. It also can be financially a high ticket thing, right? Making sure that you're providing yourself with the sustenance that you need. It can sometimes be expensive. You feel like you're treated differently. I know that sometimes, like in having lost weight, sometimes folks receive you a little differently than you're used to being received. As a bigger person, going into hospital rooms, talking to doctors, sometimes they'll dismiss my pain level or concerns that I have expressed by naming it as my weight. I could really come in there and talk about anything, and the first thing that people asked me or had asked me was, have you thought about losing weight? Are you losing weight? Are you working out? And I recognize that some of those things have been really important in this journey. And I also recognize that that's not always the reason why something is how it is. And having to consistently advocate for yourself can feel extremely exhausting. And so when you lose weight, sometimes you get treated differently, not only from medical professionals, but sometimes in dating and how you engage with people socially. You're not as like highly visible or hyper invisible as you used to be. And there might even have been a moment where you're a person who overcompensates for feeling less than in your body. I know that I have been the funny friend, right? I have been the person that's like the life of the party or like wanting to take care of everybody. And when I went through this surgery, I had to take a step back and ask myself, like, does that suit me anymore? And that can be an exhausting experience. So I talked about other people seeing your body in a way that may or may not be true for you. Sometimes there's a cognitive dissonance, like your brain knows something to be true and then other people are saying something different. So one of the things that me and my family had talked about before was being termed or deemed as skinny mini, or like, you know, oh, you losing a lot of weight real fast. And sometimes I'm like, I don't see that. Like in my mind, I do not see that. That's not how I experience myself, even though I know I have lost quite a bit of weight. You know, to be deemed as skinny when I know that that's not true is sometimes really a rub for me. And of course, they don't mean it with any malicious intent. I recognize that, and so want to make sure to name that. I know that that's not everybody's mission though when they're saying that. Sometimes folks are being funny or being disrespectful, and I know my family is not trying to be. It still doesn't feel good in my brain because I'm like, I know that that's not true for me. Okay. Thinking about body dysmorphia. So knowing you've lost the weight but still find things to fix on a consistent basis. It's like, oh, loose skin, oh, this, that, versus like, these things come with a surgery like this, and it doesn't mean that it can't change, and it doesn't mean that it's not something to be worked on, because it's not going to go from one thing to absolutely the best thing that you can ever do. All of this takes work. The surgery itself is just a tool. It really gets you started in your journey so that you can make space for the other things that you would like to do, but it's not the end all be all. So it does take work, and that body dysmorphia is like the thought in your brain that you can never be the size that you actually are, because in your brain you see your body as one way. And so I think that deserves to have space to be able to explore, and I think with a professional is the best way to do that. Otherwise you might pick up unhealthy habits and behaviors that come with that, either to continue in a way that doesn't suit you, or just ways that are extremely harmful. Okay, so I know that there are effects of things like loose skin. So I have loose skin, especially on my arms and my thighs. So those are some of the places that I've carried the weight the most. And I know that it can be really heavy for folks. I know that like for the loose skin, it can be daggone 20 pounds of loose skin for folks. So sometimes it is a heavy burden to carry. It also feels like a badge of honor. Right? Like you've gone through this process. It's been a really arduous and hard process. Your loose skin is something that can be changed, right? It can be worked on. Make sure that you're taking your collagen and things like that. Now, that doesn't solve all of it, but I know that sometimes we go into judgment mode when we're looking at things like, oh, I have loose skin. And so that is a mental toll that can you can really take on your body, because you're picking apart the things that don't feel good to you. So making sure that you're keeping in really in the back of your mind that this thing doesn't have to stay that way, and that you also have to talk to yourself differently in the midst of this process. It is a tool. It is not an end-all be-all. There are going to be things that don't necessarily feel savory, but these are things that can be worked on and worked through. I know that feeling like a burden for needing alternatives like smaller plates, smaller portions, needing to take a break between meals. So sometimes it is having your smaller portion and not being able to drink at the same time. Sometimes that is a mental battle that you're having. It's also an emotional one because you're like, I should be able to do X, Y, and Z, and the body doesn't allow for that. That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just means that you have to prioritize what it is that you want to do at the moment. Do you want to eat or do you want to drink? Because you want to make sure that you don't overfill yourself, because you can have something like dumping syndrome where now you don't have any of your sustenance because it's outside of yourself, right? So wanting to be mindful that you're not a burden for needing alternatives. You advocating for what you need is an absolute right that you have. And this journey, again, it's a process. So if you're not used to saying the things that you need, there will be moments where you have to advocate for yourself and set boundaries that this is either okay or not okay for you. But having smaller portions, also not being able to eat what everybody eats. So some folks are able to still eat carbs, some folks aren't. It doesn't settle right with their stomach. It doesn't mean that it's a complete loss. You find alternatives to that thing so that you can have feel full, feel fulfilled, and it's gonna require trying new things. And that's a process, all just flat out, okay? There are certain things like plate envy. I know that I've seen people's plates and I'm like, oh, I want more. And I know that if I have more, it's not gonna sit right with me. It is not gonna be comfortable. Most of the time, by the time I'm about 3 or 4 bites in, I can already start to feel my stomach feeling a little bit full. Because of course, I'm left with about 30%, 20% of the stomach that I had. So I have to be mindful of what I'm ingesting so that I can be prepared, right, to push it aside. And I'm just not gonna be able to eat what everybody eats. I can eat some of, right? And sometimes I have to have alternatives. So maybe it's not the rice. Maybe it's not the mashed potatoes. Maybe it's not, full potatoes. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just the protein and the veggies, and making sure to eat your protein first. That's something to think about. So I know that there are certain things like hair loss and vitamin deficiencies. So one of the things that they say is to make sure to take your vitamins. This journey in particular, when you take out something a piece of your stomach, if you're redirecting some things, the way that your digestion happens, you don't get the same amount of vitamins that you might have gotten on your own. So you are required with these surgeries, the different ones, to have some bariatric vitamins. It's also important to think about hair, skin, and nails, right? Some of the ways in which the vitamins were present in your body, they also impact the way that things grow, including your hair and your nails. And so making sure that you're also incorporating something like that to, boost the system back up. That's really important in this journey. And I know that with hair, it's an aesthetic thing, right? So when you have a certain mane, you're used to having a certain level of hair, a certain length of hair. If that changes, sometimes it changes the way that you feel like you're seen or even your worthiness. And I think that it's important to make sure that you're caring for yourself in the ways of providing those vitamins for your body so that you continue to grow and have a healthy diet and a healthy relationship to the different parts of your body, because that could take a toll potentially. It doesn't have to. For me, I haven't lost any hair, but of course I have locks, so I don't know that it would show up the same as someone whose hair is out. So that has been my experience, that hasn't been a thing for me. I also know that some folks' teeth are impacted, so making sure that you're taking things like calcium, that you have your iron, that you're taking your vitamin D, like different things like that can support, and immune boosting too, because sometimes the body in which it was able to fight things might not be so going forward. So making sure that you have the things that you need ahead of time. So you have to also adjust to your taste buds changing. What you are used to eating sometimes will completely change once you have the surgery. This sounds like a negative thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, but if you have an emotional connection to certain items, sometimes it can feel really daunting to potentially lose those things. But you're not losing them to like be a loser, right? Like you're losing them to potentially gain something else. And it doesn't mean that you have to you don't have to find alternatives, because you absolutely can. I think it's important to know that you don't have to be without everything. Sometimes the idea of losing something, you feel like you've lost everything, and we have to recognize if that's a fallacy and a narrative that we're telling ourselves, or is that the actual truth? Okay, because sometimes that can be a half truth. Finding other things and other ways to healthily engage with food can definitely be a part of this journey for you. And I know that it has been for me. There are certain things that I like. There were certain protein shakes I even liked pre-op that I don't like post-op. Like they feel heavy, they just kind of feel nasty, or even water itself. I know that this sounds incredibly silly, but plain water by itself does not taste good to me. It feels really heavy. So most of the time I have things like Mio, which is a flavoring, and the sweet tea Mio is one of my favorite things. I know that some folks are leery about the sugar alcohols and the fake sugar and things like that. So be mindful with your surgery team and your nutrition staff. Like, what does that mean for you? Are they okay with you having those things? If not, finding alternatives like maybe it's lemon, lime, cucumber water instead. So being cognizant that you don't have to have absolutely nothing or all of something. It can really be a good meeting in the middle. Finding things to settle your stomach. Sometimes your stomach is not going to agree with everything you eat. And that can be a hard thing because your brain is like, I should be able to do X, Y, and Z. That's not how the body works. Shoulding yourself is not going to be helpful in this process. It's really finding the things that work for you. So some folks can't eat eggs, they can't eat tuna, they can't eat certain things, and other folks can eat everything. Right? So it's finding the good balance of, does this work for me and my pouch or my stomach, or however you deem your system going forward. It's important to think about what works for everybody might not work for you, and really not comparing other people's journeys. So that's another piece that feels really important. Comparison is the thief of joy. So if you're looking at your journey and you're comparing it to someone else, you will always be more concerned about how they're doing and more judgmental about where you're at than if you were to just stay the course and go the way that you, your doctor, and your nutrition staff have said that you should go. Being very mindful that you are unique and so is your experience. And so taking time to really focus on that versus what's going on for everybody else. So talking about solutions, right? Because I just named a whole lot of things, and I really hope this didn't deter you. I just want to prepare you because some of these things are not conversations that are had within programs. And I think it's important from a bariatric perspective and a mental health one that you're thinking about how to manage as it comes, okay? So in the conversation, I did talk a little bit about them, but making sure that you're checking in with a mental health professional. I think that this journey itself can be very arduous. It can be very heavy, and it can be very long. And I think it's important to make sure that you have someone that's objective, that can talk to you from a professional standpoint and be able to give you some knowledge that maybe you didn't have, or just having space to talk about it. What are your concerns? What are your impacts? What's happening for you? Because when you hold them, suppress them, it can come out in some really unhealthy ways. And food has been a coping mechanism for some of our emotions, like in the past. And I'm not talking about everybody. That's not everybody's experience. but thinking about how you manage your emotions feels really important for this journey. So thinking about potentially talking to a mental health professional throughout your journey so that you don't have to get to a place where you feel down and out and then grasping for straws. So I think having that even before you get started is important. If you're looking for some additional supports, I provide a 5-week program, and this is not just a selling point at all. I want to talk about this from a real space, but I'm offering this as an additional solution as well. I have a 5-week program that works with pre-op patients, and it discusses this at length, your personal experience. So if you are interested in that, you can find that information in the description. I would say creating and joining bariatric communities, community within your personal and professional community, as long as you have people who understand, right? Or sometimes they won't understand, but they are incredibly supportive. Lean into those. Doing this in isolation can be relatively challenging because you're going to be in the world at some point. And so having folks that understand your perspective, or at least where you're at right now, is really important. So I want to say, like, TikTok has been incredibly helpful for me. I've gotten recipes, I've gotten like friendships, I've gotten folks to really call me in on my stuff. So you can utilize things like TikTok. You can also utilize Instagram, Google, looking at different therapy sites. I'm sure that there's a lot of YouTube creators, which I know are incredibly amazing. So each of us have something to provide, and having a community and having people that care about your well-being is incredibly important in this experience. Setting and maintaining boundaries. So I know that for some folks that is really challenging to do because you don't like to tell people like what it is that you need. And I think it's also hard to tell people how to and to not treat you. And I think that with this journey, because you're going to have to do a lot of focusing on yourself and being mindful of what you're doing, being mindful of what you're eating, you will have to set some boundaries. There are some things that you're not going to be able to do. On the flip, there are going to be some things that you weren't able to do before, right? So one of my biggest goals, and I know that it sounds small to other people, but it's huge to me. I want to get on a roller coaster, right? I know that I'm working toward like being able to fit comfortably on a roller coaster. That is like one of my biggest goals. And I know that there are certain things that I'm not going to be able to do in the interim to get to that particular goal. Right? I'm not going to be able to eat as much as I used to eat. I'm not going to be able to drink how I used to drink. So really being cognizant of like, what are my limitations, and being able to set boundaries with the people that matter to me. And yeah, that really, those are some of the most important things that I can think about from my perspective. I'm not saying that this is the end all be all. Please make sure that you're doing your research. Please make sure that you're advocating for yourself because you deserve it. And make space to set boundaries about what works for you and what doesn't. Your voice matters. And I want to encourage you that if you need additional support, I'm here. I want to be a part of your community. I may not have all the answers, but I might be able to point you in the direction. I don't have it all. I know that I'm 19 months post-op and getting there. And it's important that like folks don't feel alone in this journey, and you don't have to. So I'm here. I know that the community on TikTok is incredibly supportive. But of course, people are human. So there might be little things here and there that might feel challenging. You take what you need and leave the rest. Okay. Thank you again for joining me on today for this YouTube. And I look forward to the next one. Have a good one.